Allmänt anrop. Här kallar dykbåten Mappas. Vi har dykningar utanför Bäckholmen.
These divers are getting ready to enter the cold waters of Stockholm harbour. They are looking for the surviving remains of one of the most majestic galleons ever to put to sea, the Vasa. Archaeologist Fred Hocker is the project leader.
When people write the history of 20th century archaeology, there are a handful of sites that will appear in every textbook. Tutankhamun's tomb will be one of those. And Vasa is going to be one of those because it is huge, it's spectacular, it's exceptionally well preserved. It reveals enormous amounts of information about the past.
In the 1620s, the King of Sweden, Gustav II Adolf, also known as Gustavus Adolphus, reinforced his fleet with a new generation of warships.
First ship was called Vasa. It would be the most powerfully armed warship in the world. Vasa cast off from the royal palace.
On the 10th of August, 1628, the Vasa, named for Sweden's ruling dynasty, set sail on her maiden voyage. As the ship was pulling out to sea, the cannon fired a farewell salute. A small gust of wind caused the ship to heel. It recovered, but a second, much stronger gust tipped the ship so far over, water started pouring in through the open gun ports. 18 minutes after setting sail, the Vasa disappeared under the water.
The water there is 32 meters deep, but the ship is taller than that. So even after the ship came to rest on the bottom, the upper ends of the masts still poked out of the water, so everyone could see where the ship had sunk.
The sinking of the Vasa was a catastrophe for Sweden's ambition to dominate the Baltic Sea and become the most powerful nation in Northern Europe. Raised from the seabed in the 1960s, the wreck of the Vasa is an amazing time machine. An archaeological treasure trove of artifacts that hold countless mysteries for researchers. Why did the Vasa sink? What does its wreck reveal about the geopolitics of a bygone era? What does it tell us about the lives of ordinary people?
I've been working with Vasa now for 19 years, almost a third of my life. It's the pinnacle of an archaeological career.
Even though the wreck was in near perfect condition when it was raised, some artifacts are yet to be found.
And which spot are you going to look at first?
It's one timber called number 11.
Okay.
Over a year ago, the scientific team sent down a robot to explore the harbour bed.
Does not look like a Swedish knife, does it?
No, it doesn't.
That reminds me when I lived in Texas.
Yeah.
It's a classic Bowie knife.
Yeah. So these red dots here, the indications here, these timbers, I think, looks interesting.
Things we should look at.
Yeah. So we try to go down and have a look and see what we see.
This dive is the result of years of research.
That leaves one cannon that nobody has picked up yet, and that still could be down there. But there's a lot of other things that could be down there that are also very interesting. If you're looking for the bowsprit, you're looking for a timber that's like that thick, and 7 meters, 8 meters long. Big stuff could be down there.
Yeah, I had quite good visibility yesterday. It's sort of pitch black.
Here in the Baltic, the water is below 8 degrees. Despite the limited visibility, the archaeologists hope to find the Vasa's last missing cannon. Not all treasure lies on the seabed. Some is held in the National Archives in Stockholm. Contemporary documents can provide vital information about the sinking. Anna Maria Forsberg, one of the Vasa Museum's researchers, has found one account of the events.
Det här, det är ett brev från rådet i Sverige, det vill säga regeringen kan man säga, till Gustav II Adolf, Sveriges kung, som befinner sig utomlands i Polen. Och man kan tänka sig att det var lite pinsamt för dem att skriva det, för här berättar de nämligen att skeppet Vasa har förlist. Trots att det var stilla väder och det fanns ingen uppenbar orsak. Några känner man till som är skadade. Till exempel kapten Sövring, Erik Jönsson, han ligger rätt för döden. Han är full med vatten och illa slagen av luckorna eftersom han har gått ner i skeppet. Och gamle kapten Jonsson, han är död.
In another letter, Gabriel Oxenstierna writes to his brother Axel, the Grand Chancellor of Sweden, the King's right-hand man.
Hände här en stor olycka är det att det nya sköna skeppet Vasa och kastade helt omkull med så sköna metallstycken. Det som jag tycker är nästan mest spännande med det här brevet, det är en liten passage där han beskriver att båtsmännen hade fått ta med sig sina hustrur och barn på den här resan. Tanken var ju inte att de skulle vara med hela vägen utan de skulle gå av. Men olyckligtvis så kom de ju aldrig så långt och flera av dem dog. Och enligt brevet så dog ungefär 30 personer.
Unusually for the period, most of the sailors knew how to swim. This is why there were relatively few casualties. Preoccupied with his military campaign in Poland, the king did not hear the news immediately. It was several weeks before his response reached the capital. He demanded that an attempt be made to raise the ship and the guilty parties punished. Admiral Carl Carlsson Gyllenhelm, the king's half-brother, took charge of investigating the fiasco.
A little less than 4 weeks after the sinking, an inquest was arranged in which the surviving officers and the shipbuilders would be interrogated by a prosecutor in front of a jury made up of members of the Royal Council and senior officers from the military. The inquest was held in one of the main rooms of the Royal Palace in Stockholm, the palace called Tre Kronor. Fortunately, the minutes from the inquest survive, so we get a very good sense of the moment and of the people who were involved.
Captain Soffring Hansen.
The captain escaped from the sinking ship at the last minute. He was arrested as soon as he set foot on dry land. According to the official records, he was shackled before his clothes were even dry.
Everyone was sober. All the guns were properly secured. You can cut me in 1,000 pieces if all the guns were not secured.
Erik Jonsson was also questioned. The artillery master miraculously survived. He had been struck by a gunport hatch cover and lay near death for several days.
He was an artillery master, and so he had run below decks to check that the guns were properly secured, which he reported they were. And one of the questions that he asked everyone was, were you drunk? And Erik Jonsson gives a very detailed answer because he explains that he had had something to drink just twice that day, and that he also said that he sat in the great cabin with his servant where they had a small bit of meat and bread and nothing more than that for the rest of the day. He then went on to try to defend himself.
The ship would have sunk even if no sail had been raised.
At which point, Admiral Carl Carlsson Gyllenhielm, who was chairing the inquest, asked if he knew if the ship was unstable.
I'm not a captain, nor a vice admiral, I'm just an artillery master. For questions about its stability, you should have to ask the captain or the shipbuilder.
The man who had designed the ship, Henrik Hubertsson, had died a year before the ship sailed. He couldn't defend himself, and he didn't need to be punished, so he was a perfectly acceptable, even an ideal scapegoat.
No plans of the Vasa have been found. Shipbuilders of the period did not work from drawings. In the 17th century, Dutch shipbuilding was highly respected, and the Vasa's Dutch designer had moved to Stockholm to manage the Navy shipyard with his wife.
In the time that Vasa was built, none of the mathematical tools that we use today to calculate stability or displacement had yet been discovered. And so you largely had to build on the basis of experience. You took a design that you knew worked from a successful ship and made incremental changes to that.
Designer Henrik Hibbertson was a man of experience, but the Vasa represented a new challenge.
One of the problems that he had in designing Vasa is that he'd never built a ship with multiple gun decks. And so he was stepping very far outside of his experience when he set about designing this ship.
When Hibbertson died, his wife, Margareta Nilsdotter, took over running the shipyard. It was not unheard of for women, and particularly widows, to manage a family concern. The Vasa was completed under her supervision, with the technical build overseen by her husband's business partner, Arant de Groote. De Groote recounted submitting the planned dimensions to the king. The model was a ship built for the French.
We built the ship that the king had approved.
Then why did the ship sink?
I don't know. Only God knows.
God, or perhaps the king. Who was this monarch so feared throughout Europe? When Gustavus Adolphus came to the throne in 1611, he was 16. He inherited 3 wars, one with Denmark, another with Russia, and a third with Poland.
Gustav Adolf var en riktig krigarkung, en som själv stod i täten för sina trupper, som visade mod och som stred i främsta ledet. Och Sverige var i krig under en stor del av hans regeringstid. Av hans 21 år på tronen var det fred i bara 4 år.
The 30 Years' War broke out in 1618. Its roots were in the political and religious clashes that had changed the face of Europe during the previous century, with Protestantism replacing Catholicism in many northern countries. Conversion was a way for states to assert their independence from the Pope, Catholic Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire. Raised a Protestant, Gustavus Adolphus saw the upheaval as an opportunity to transform Sweden.
Sverige på den här tiden är ju ett ganska fattigt land, men i jämförelse med kontinenten så ligger landet efter. Vi har ingen rik och mäktig adel, utan de bor i någon sorts trähus, de flesta. Samtidigt är det också ett väldigt religiöst land där Gud spelar en väldigt stor roll i människornas liv.
Despite Sweden's struggling economy, the king still nurtured great ambitions. He wanted to make his country the dominant power in Northern Europe. In Poland, Gustavus Adolphus was not only fighting a Catholic neighbour, he was also fighting his cousin, Sigismund III, King of Poland-Lithuania. As the grandsons of Gustav I, they both claimed to be the rightful heir to the Swedish throne. In 1621, Gustavus Adolphus seized the port of Riga from the Poles, giving him control over an expansive territory that encompasses today's Baltic states. Next, the King of Sweden wanted to take Gdansk, but his fleet suffered heavy losses. To regain superiority, new ships had to be built.
There is some pressure because the king wants to build up his naval force as rapidly as possible so that it can be a useful tool in his war against his cousin, Zygmunt of Poland-Lithuania.
A large, heavily armed ship was needed. A 16th century change in naval tactics had seen boarding give way to cannonading. Tall stern castles benefited boarding, but did not provide the same strategic advantage once cannon were introduced. Ships remained at a distance to fire broadsides at each other. Why opt for cannonading? In 2013, Fred Hocker conducted an experiment to gauge its effectiveness. He cast a cannon identical to those on the Vasa.
I'd really like to understand how you would have used Vasa in a battle in the 1620s. Well, if we're going to test how effective the cannon is against a ship, I'd like to see how accurate is it? How much damage does it do? Well, why don't we also test how well a ship would stand up to the cannon? So let's build a section of Vasa and use that as the target.
The test is conducted at a military firing range using a full-scale cannon. The target is positioned 30 meters away, a similar distance to close combat prior to boarding.
The ball creates a shock wave in front of it that spalls off big splinters on the inside. And those splinters expand out from the point of impact in a cone at up to 45 degrees from the angle of impact. And the paradox is, the thicker the timber is, the more the risk is for the people inside, because the thicker the timber generates bigger splinters. If you were killed by being hit by a cannonball, it became part of a legend because it was actually quite rare. Most people were killed or injured by splinters.
The cannon had a range of 300 to 500 meters, but was so inaccurate, they were fired at the last minute.
The primary function of artillery in Vasa's time was believed to be to soften up the enemy before you boarded the ship. And so what you were trying to do was to wound as many enemy men as you could and break their will to defend their own ship. So what you wanted to do was to create carnage. You didn't really want to sink the ship because you wanted to capture the ship. So ideally you'd like to wound as many soldiers and sailors as you could with as little damage to the ship as you could.
Gunners used a range of ammunition depending on the kind of damage that was required.
There were three types of ammunition you could use against rigging. One was a normal cannonball with a spike through it, and that was designed to tear ragged holes in sails at long distance to slow an enemy ship down and reduce its ability to maneuver. Someone had the bright idea that if that would be effective, you could make it even better by taking that cannonball and making two halves with a spike in each half and a pivot in the middle so that in action it would open in the air like a pair of scissors. At close range, you could load something called chain shot, which is two half cannonballs fastened together by a length of chain, and that would open up in the air and travel like a flying guillotine. And that would cut down rigging, cut down men. And finally, at close range, if you were interested in really destroying the will of the crew, you loaded something that we call case shot. And that's a wooden canister about that big, full of musket balls or scrap metal. It turns a 24-pounder cannon into a gigantic shotgun.
The temptation to install multiple cannon is understandable. The generations of warships that came after the Vasa all resorted to cannonading. These vessels had no tall stern castles as they had become superfluous. But the Vasa was built during a period of tactical transition, when naval architects included both cannon and a tall stern castle in their ship design.
The desire for heavier and heavier armament created design challenges for the builders of ships in how to accommodate all of this weight high up in the ship and still have it possible to sail the ship safely.
Did the Vasa sink as the result of a design flaw or because of a navigational error? Several days into the inquest, the prosecutor believed he had found the culprit. Not a superior officer, but the ship's master, Göran Mattsson. Mattsson defended himself, telling the inquest that the captain had conducted a stability test.
30 sailors had to run back and forth on the deck, but after 3 trips they were told to stop. If they'd continued, the ship would have capsized.
Mattsson gave further evidence to the stunned inquest.
It was Vice Admiral Claes Fleming who told them to stop the test. I heard him say, if only His Royal Majesty were at home.
As a member of the Navy's top brass, Claes Fleming had direct access to the king. Why did he not tell him about the test? The minutes of the inquest include another critical testimony. Hugo was probably a shipyard worker.
Hugo says that the ship is not wide enough and that the keel cannot bear the weight above the water.
And basically that's the same conclusion we have today.
Exactly.
There's not enough ship in the water to carry the part that's out of the water.
Yeah.
Everyone knew. No one spoke up. However, the ship's master had tried to stabilize the Vasa by putting ballast in the hold.
Here's where the fiscal and the prosecutor asks the ship's master, was it your fault that the ship sank because you didn't put enough ballast in the ship? And then he answers and explains that he put in the right amount and he couldn't have put 1 stone more, he says. And anyway, if he had added more ballast, the gun ports would have been too close to the water and things would have been even worse.
Did the captain make an error just after the Vasa set sail?
As Vasa left the harbor, they fired a salute, a tradition, which meant that all the gun ports were open and the cannon were run out. And eventually, part of the process of getting ready for sea would have been to pull the cannon in and close the gun ports. They hadn't gotten to that point yet when that gust of wind filled the sails, but it was the captain's first order once the ship started to heel, was to try to close the gun ports so that the ship wouldn't take on water.
After water flooded the lower decks, it was impossible to right the ship. Had the gun ports been closed, the Vasa probably wouldn't have sunk that day. But it was not seaworthy.
Vems fel var det egentligen att Vasa sjönk? En fråga som är väldigt aktuell direkt efter förlisningen och sen har fortsatt att jäcka människor. Men det är ganska svårt att hitta en ensam skyldig person. De som konstruerade skeppet, de som byggde det, hade naturligtvis ett ansvar. Amiralen Fleming, som visste att det var instabilt och som inte sa någonting till kungen, har ju ett ännu större ansvar. Men det vilar ju också ett ansvar på kungen själv, som uppenbarligen regerade i en kultur där ingen av hans undersåtar vågade berätta sanningen för honom.
There's a lot of literature in the business world especially that uses Vasa as a case study for how not to manage a project. There's even a book about this called Vasa Syndrome.
By the end of the inquest, no one was held accountable and condemned for the catastrophe. But the Vasa became a salient lesson. Several unsuccessful salvage attempts were made in the months following the sinking. Then the sea closed over the Vasa for 300 years. Over the years, many treasure hunters tried to locate the wreck. In 1956, Anders Franzen, an engineer and maritime history enthusiast, tried his luck too. He was assisted by leading diver Per Edvin Falting.
And so they start dragging the water in front of Beckholmen in the summer of '56. And on August 25th, the grab that they're using fastens in something. And there's a plug of black oak.
They tried to identify the origin of this fragment by exploring the seabed. It was a large ship buried in 5 meters of mud. When a 3-meter figurehead, a lion, the symbol of royal power, and a cannon bearing Gustavus Adolphus's arms were recovered, the archaeologists knew they had found the Vasa.
It was decided that the first phase of moving the ship would involve putting cables completely under the ship. And so Navy divers spent the next 2 years digging 6 tunnels completely under the ship, using high-pressure water jets so that they could pass cables under the ship. One of the questions that the engineers connected to the project have during the entire salvage process is, can Vasa take it? Is the ship in good enough condition that it will hold together under all of the stress of pulling it out of the mud, bringing it to the surface, moving it, and then emptying it? Because one of the possibilities that they consider is that when they lift the ship, the 6 cables will just slice the ship in 7 pieces.
The wreck was slowly moved to shallower waters. Almost 5 years later, on the 24th of April 1961, a crowd gathered to watch the final phase of the salvage effort. Broadcast live around the world, millions of viewers watched this delicate operation.
The winches on the 2 pontoons start to haul the ship up. Slowly. Clank, clank, clank. And soon, the ends of some of the upper timbers of the ship, like bent fingers, start to appear out of the water. And people wonder, is this actually a ship? But soon, 2 ghostly faces appear, coming up out of the water towards the bow, that have stayed in their places for 333 years. Originally, they were Roman warriors, but now they're so eroded they look like ghosts. And people can start to see how much ship there really is.
The upper parts of the Vasa had been damaged over the centuries, but the bases of the masts, the decks, and the hull had miraculously survived. The mud and the water was cleared to lighten the ship. Three months later, the wreck was slowly towed to a dry dock. Gustavus Adolphus never saw his galleon sail, but his successor, Gustav VI Adolf, had the privilege of exploring it. Even without its stern castle, the hull stands at an impressive 20 meters. Carl Olof Sederland, a pioneer of maritime archaeology, was part of the team that refloated the Vasa in 1961.
This is my favorite view of the ship. What was it like when you first went on board, right after it had been raised?
It was wet. You had to be dressed in rubber from top to and have a helmet on, and then you had to wade through the mud. Här kom det hundratals fynd per dag som vi hade att ta hand om. Och det var alltså en intensiv verksamhet. Vraket var i väldigt god kondition av flera skäl. Östersjön är ett särskilt hav i det avseendet att det bevarar trävirke bättre än vad som är fallet i stora oceaner. Dels är det ett lugnare hav, så det förstörs inte lika kraftigt. Sen finns det en skeppsmask som finns i saltare vatten och som inte finns i Östersjön. Och den skeppsmasken, den äter upp trävirke.
These are the reasons for the Vasa's remarkable state of preservation.
But the chemistry of the water in Stockholm Harbour is terrible for metals. And so we have not so much in the way of metal material that survives, especially if it's iron. There are over 250 tools of various types found on board the ship, but a lot of them are just sticks this long. Only the handles survive. The axe heads and hammer heads have disappeared. They've corroded away. Even where we have iron objects that survive, they've lost a lot of their weight. So a cannonball that originally weighed 10 kilograms maybe weighs 2 kilograms or 3 kilograms now.
Once out of the water, there was a danger the wreck would rot, so it was sprayed with glycol. This solution slowly penetrates the wood and represses the activity of microorganisms liable to attack it. In 1988, after 26 years of spraying and drying the Vasa, a purpose-built museum opened its doors. Today, it is Sweden's most popular museum. Visitors can admire the remarkable ship, as well as the 700-odd statues that once adorned it. Model replicas reflect the vibrancy of the original colors.
När Vasa seglade iväg på sin jungfrufärd, då var ju inte skeppet så här brunt som det är nu. Tvärtom så myllrade det av färger. Grälla, kitschiga färger som vi kanske skulle uppfatta nästan som vulgära. Men det var tidens mode. Man har ju inte sparat på några kostnader, man har haft dyra färger och man har till och med förgyllt en hel del av skulpturerna. Och allt det här visar ju vilken betydelse det här skeppet tillmättes som en symbol för Sverige. Men det här var ju inte bara ett krigsskepp utan det var också ett propagandaskepp. Och det här, det är Sveriges folk, symboliserade av 6 kvinnor och 5 män. Och det här är ju otroligt ovanligt på 1600-talet, att framställa en nation på det här sättet. Och han har lovat att skydda sitt folk, men de har också lovat att vara lojala och trogna. Och den som är min absoluta favorit, det är en liten knubbig bondkvinna som sitter längst ut på höger sida. Hon har tung byst, synliga bröstvårtor, hon är uppnäst och hon ser lite dum ut faktiskt. Och det är så som överheten ofta såg på befolkningen i Sverige vid den här tiden.
Atop the stern castle, the king dominates his subjects, but he is supported by these representatives of the people. Gustavus Adolphus stands above the heroes of the Old Testament and is in line with King David the harp player who slayed Goliath with God's help.
David var också välkänd för svenskarna och han symboliserade ju också den här tanken att även om man är liten och svag, även om man inte har många soldater eller många vapen, så kan man besegra en stor och mäktig fiende.
The Vasa was richly decorated inside and out. As the fleet's flagship, this galleon would have been used by the king. Analysis has revealed that the great cabin's wood panelling was not painted but varnished. This cabin would have been fitted out like a room in the royal palace, with decorative elements and luxury furnishings. Over the last 20 years, Fred Hocker and the research team have accurately reconstructed most of the Vasa, but a few key elements are still to be found.
So, do you see wonderful things down there? Interesting things?
Lots of timbers and stuff, but that we can connect to Vasa.
Okay, just loose timber.
Loose timbers, nothing, no cannon, no sculpture.
And the sediment out, further out from the slope is really, not so nice.
You're always disappointed if you don't find what you hoped you'd find. I'm still pretty convinced that there is one cannon unaccounted for from Vasa's 64, and it has to be somewhere.
Sometimes researchers do get lucky. A few miles from where the Vasa sank, archaeologist Jim Hansen has found another wreck. It will help our understanding of the Vasa. It is a remarkable find. A large warship with 2 gun decks, just like the Vasa. The archives confirm that it has to be the Iplet, the Vasa's sister ship, built a year after the Vasa sank in 1629.
När vi kom ner första gången på Äpplet, så när vi kom ner där var det mörkt och jävligt dålig sikt, ärligt talat. Så var det ganska mycket stenbumlingar och man tänkte så här, kanske inte var så roligt här. Då kom man till en stor skrovsida som sticker upp en par meter på sina olika ställen då. På Vasa, så man fick ju verkligen den här känslan i magen att det här var wow, det här är någonting annat. Kanonportarna faktiskt var helt bevarade och intakta och i 2 olika nivåer. Så att här låg det ett 2-däckat stort örlogsfartyg. Och då med den arkivforskning vi har gjort tidigare så vet vi att det bara är Vasas systerfartyg som förmodligen hamnat där som hade 2 kanondäck.
The Iplet and the Vasa are sister ships because they are exactly the same length and were built at the same shipyard.
We took the measurements of the deck beams to try to figure out the widest part of the hull. And here you can see the Eplet in orange, and the grey one is Vasa. So we see here that the Eplet is much wider than Vasa is.
Yeah.
And you also see here in the profile.
It's about a meter bigger.
Yeah, it's exactly as the archives tells us.
Yeah, right, because the survey they did of Eplet.
I'm also very curious if...
Vasa's a disaster, but Eplet is just enough better that it's actually sails. It's actually used on campaigns briefly, but is never considered a really good ship.
Sen har vi också hittat att man försöker faktiskt sälja henne till Frankrike 3 gånger, men de vill inte heller köpa.
Wider and more stable than the Vasa, the Iplet helps prove that the shipbuilders had identified the problem and tried to remedy it. After a short period of active service, the Iplet was left in dock in Stockholm for 30 years.
And then by the 1650s, it's decided it would be a better use of that ship to form part of the blockage that was being built in the approaches to Stockholm. This was a very common way of defending a place, to sink ships. We know of it from Roman times.
Äpplet kommer få ligga kvar på botten. Det är alldeles för dyrt att plocka upp ett så stort skepp. Vi har våra erfarenheter med Vasa. Och det liksom finns ingen poäng när vi har dagens tekniker, när vi kan göra 3D-modeller.
With its many treasures, the older of the 2 sister ships is a veritable time machine. After she sank in 1628, people tried to recover valuable items. The wreck was easy to find. She lay at a depth of 30 meters, with her masts sticking out of the water. The most coveted items were her cannon. There were 64 in all. When the galleon was raised in 1961, only 3 were found. So what happened to the others?
1658 introducerade Hans Albrecht von Traisleben dykarklockan i Sverige. En stor klocka tillverkad av bly. Den sänktes ner under vattnet stadigt och hölls så att den här luftfickan blev kvar där uppe. Och då kunde en person stå här då och fortfarande andas inuti klockan.
Lars Gustafsson, a professional diver, has tested all sorts of equipment over the course of his career. A 17th century diving suit is one of the most dangerous. It's made of moose hide and sewn using traditional Inuit techniques to be as waterproof as possible. Bell diving is dangerous. The oxygen inside the bell is rapidly depleted. To make up for this, a barrel of air connected by a hose to the bell is lowered at the same time. Inside the bell, only the diver's head and shoulders are out of the water. He has no means of seeing what he's doing, and the weights he wears to maintain stability make it very hard to move. During this experiment, Lars Gustafsson used hooks designed in the 17th century to try and understand how the cannon were recovered.
Efter en sån här realistisk klockdykning så förstår man att det gick att göra sådana här saker, men det återstår väldigt många mysterier som man inte vet hur de lyckades klara av. Till exempel att bärga en bronskanon ut ur en kanonlucka på Vasa utan att skada träet någonting alls. Det är helt otroligt.
Traileben's operation was a success. Between 1663 and 1665, 60 cannon were recovered from the wreck. But where are they now? Danish historian Esger Christensen has been searching the German, Danish and Swedish archives. He has found a lead.
Vi ved, at Vasa-kanonerne blev transporteret fra Stockholm til Lübeck i efteråret 1665. Og der var meget. Der var faktisk det, der svarer til 62 tons bronzekanoner.
53 cannon crossed the Baltic, bound for the port of Lübeck. Lübeck was a major hub for copper and arms. The city was known throughout Europe for its foundries. After 40 years underwater, corrosion made the cannon unstable. If anyone had tried to fire them, they would have exploded. So the bronze was melted down for new weapons. Seventeenth century European trade was not only about arms. From the 12th century, alliances between city-states in Northern Europe resulted in one of the world's earliest trade associations, the Hanseatic League. From London to Novgorod in Russia, the League included some 200 towns and trading posts. Connected via land routes to other trade networks, it spanned Europe. To maintain their sovereignty, some Hanseatic cities remained neutral during conflicts. This meant trade could continue with all warring parties. Peace talks were also held in neutral cities. In the 17th century, the North and Baltic Seas were vital for the transportation of goods. When the Vasa was built, the 7 united provinces of the Netherlands dominated maritime trade. By trading with Amsterdam and the Hanseatic ports, Gustavus Adolphus could sell Sweden's valuable copper ore, allowing him to purchase supplies to build ships, such as wood from Poland, Lithuania, and hemp canvas from Brittany, Sweden's fleet became one of the most modern navies of the period. History tends to illuminate the powerful, but often tells us less about the lives of ordinary people. Studying bones can help our understanding of more everyday lives.
Enligt uppgift dog ungefär 30 personer när Vasa förliste. Och under utgrävningarna så hittade man skelett från 15 tydligt definierade personer och så ytterligare ben från kanske ett par personer till. Ett problem för forskningen har varit att en hel del av de här benen var ganska utspridda på vraket när de hittades. Och det har inte varit helt lätt att pussla ihop dem på rätt sätt. Och i det förflutna när man först gjorde det här så har det ibland blivit lite fel.
Bones, hair, and even brain were preserved. Skeletal remains found on the Vasa have made it possible to reconstruct the faces of some of the casualties. In 2022, the Vasa Museum decided to undertake further DNA analysis to gain new insights. Today, it is Skeleton G's turn to have a sample taken. This skeleton has been named Gustav. Thanks to new techniques, scientists can now extract highly accurate data from nuclear DNA. It is richer than mitochondrial DNA, but less resilient. Anna Maria Fosberg joins Marie Allen at Uppsala's forensics office.
Jag är ju lite nyfiken på allt du har att berätta.
Skeleton G's DNA has a surprise in store.
Och det indikerar här, AG, att det skulle kunna vara en kvinna. För då har man ju 2 X-kromosomer.
Så G såg antagligen inte ut så där då kan vi tänka oss. Och hette inte Gustav.
So Gustav is in fact a woman. The skull and the face were reconstructed by world-renowned reconstruction artist Oscar Nielsen. He has to start all over again. The sculptor is guided by marks on the cranium left by muscles. He has already reconstructed 6 faces for the Vasa Museum. The new DNA data tells us that the woman, now known as Gertrude, had light eyes and hair.
Att göra en ansiktsrekonstruktion baseras på att man vet tjockleken på vävnaden i ansiktet, alltså muskler, fett och hud, på ett antal punkter. Nu har jag kommit till ett stadium med det nya ansiktet där jag nästan är färdig med musklerna och nästa steg är att lägga på lager med som ska vara hud.
She's been some kind of manual laborer or doing that kind of heavy farm work or something like that. All through her life, because her spine, the elements of her spine are almost locked together because the muscle attachments in her vertebra have overgrown so much. We want to know who those people were that built the ship, who cut the timber, who sailed the ship. And in this case, the 30 people who died when the ship sank, is a way for us to understand the human dimension of what this wreck means, to look at those people as individuals.
What was Gertrude wearing? None of Skeleton G's clothing has survived, except for a bonnet, found in early 2023.
Det är jättespännande med den här mössan. Den är ju hittad väldigt nära Gertrud. Jag mätte upp den och såg att storleken stämmer väldigt bra med storleken på hennes skalle. Den här fyndgruppen har man ju faktiskt inte studerat. Så det är ju fantastiskt att vi får möjligheten att nu titta på det här i detalj. Och när jag tittar i mikroskop på den här så ser man att på vissa ställen så blir det väldigt mycket rött tillbaka.
Fragments of women's clothing found on the ship have enabled the scientists to create an outfit similar to something Gertrude would have worn.
Det är väldigt ovanligt att vanligt folks kläder har bevarats. Så de här kläderna som finns från Vasa är ju väldigt unika och det ger oss helt ny information.
Gertrude is reunited with her bonnet.
Here she is.
Well, nice to meet you, Gertrude. Of course, we're never going to get all the way there because we can't. We can't know what's inside her head. But it gives me a sense that what I do is worthwhile, that it's worth all the effort it takes to do all the different kinds of analysis that we do in order to have a chance to meet someone from the past. They're people to me, and literally putting flesh on the bones here is emotional. It takes it out of the realm of the purely academic into the realm of the very personal.
Hej!
Hallå!
Hej. Titta, vad fin den är.
Okej, då tar jag fram här då.
Ja, och du tar den. Vi ser.
Så.
The skeletons of 15 victims have been reconstructed.
Most of the people who were found in the ship are relatively young men, between the ages of, say, late teens to 30s. We have 2 older males. Of the 2, the skeleton that we call Johan is a person who is probably in his 50s, maybe even as old as 60.
This skeleton could be Hans Jonsson, an old, highly experienced captain who sailed on the Vasa's maiden voyage.
This is easily our best candidate to be Hans Jonsson because he's the oldest skeleton. He also has some injuries that suggest that he would have walked with a pretty bad limp, so probably wasn't an ordinary sailor. What we think we can see about his last moments is that he was trying to survive, that he appears to have climbed up to the top of this pile of anchor cable because it was the highest point, and as the water was rising, the air pocket in that compartment was gradually disappearing. But it was a strange place for a senior captain to be, which is why we think he probably fell there. The fact that he's a little unsteady on his feet because of injuries he'd had earlier in life means that it might be more likely that he had fallen down through the hatches when the ship began to keel over.
There was no crew list for the Vasa's maiden voyage. There is no way of knowing exactly how many people were on the ship when she sank. The soldiers had not yet boarded, but the sailors' wives and children were allowed on board that first day. The crew is a good representation of Swedish society. The sailors, mainly conscripts, came from farming and fishing families. On board, the strict military and social hierarchy between the officers and the ratings was reflected in their food, personal belongings and accommodation.
Officerarna här i kajutan, de hade utdragbara sängar där de kunde sova, 2 personer i varje säng. Det fanns ju fina stolar, fina bord, så här kunde man leva ett ganska bekvämt liv. Och det var vanligt att man hade med sig en fin servis, gott vin, kanske sprit till och med. På samma sätt som vi tror att det fanns fina tyger på bordsdukar, fint porslin, tennfat och så vidare. Ett annat lyxigt inslag här i kajutan var fönsterglasen. Man kunde titta ut genom klara rutor bort mot horisonten. Och glas var ju något väldigt exklusivt.
The rest of the crew lived on the lower decks, amongst the cannon.
Det var otroligt mycket människor här. Runt 450 personer på det här skeppet. Man nästan går och står på varandra. Man kan tänka sig att det var mörkt, fuktigt, kallt. Kanske inte alltid luktade jättegott. Så mellan 2 kanoner befann sig det vi brukar kalla ett fatlag. Det var 5 till 8 personer. Det var där de åt, det var där de sov, vilade, men kanske också roade sig på den fritid de hade. Spelade spel eller berättade historier.
The men ate out of large communal bowls, but everyone had their own wooden spoon.
Och de här skedarna, de har vi ganska många av och de är fascinerande för de är personliga, de är dekorerade, målade eller märkta med bomärken. Att transportera sötvatten i såna här trätunnor funkar inte särskilt bra för det blir skämt och dåligt fort. Det bästa att dricka på ett sånt här skepp, det är öl. Därför att öl innehåller en del kalorier, det gör människor glada och det håller sig framförallt bra på ett skepp.
30,000 artifacts have been found so far. But there is a major problem. The Vasa's hull is slowly collapsing. To monitor this worrying development, measurements are taken regularly. The situation has become critical. A metal support will be installed to stabilize the ship.
The big challenge for us is to continue and expand on the work that's been done since Vasa was raised from the bottom of the harbor over 60 years ago. When Vasa was recovered, nobody had done that before. When Vasa was conserved, nobody had tried to do that before. We're very often the first project that tries these big new ideas. Now we're facing another one of those challenges. How do we support this structure so it can carry its own weight into the future? We need to focus all of our energy on understanding the ship, investigating the ship, preserving the ship, so that Vasa can continue to tell its story for hundreds of years to come.